Greetings, Poe fans. Welcome to another edition of Poe Unplugged. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeannie Smith, and we are
The Poetastic Two.
Come zoom with us into the Unbook Club dedicated to the works of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe.
Good evening, everybody. We are so happy you are here for Poe Unplugged and the discussion of his work, Ligeia. And hopefully everybody's been able to take a few minutes and reread it or read it for the first time if you've never read it before, and maybe even have caught Vincent Price and Roger Corman's version, The Tomb of Ligeia. And so, Jeannie, do you have any thoughts before we get started?
Nope. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Unless you want to do some quick introductions, let's go.
All right. Well, we have Holly back. We have Will back. Keith is back. Mike is back. Virginia's back. And Laird is one of our new sign-ups. We're glad to have him. And Leela should be here shortly. And so I'll let her in late. And we also have a very special guest tonight, Dr. Jeff Thompson. And so we're going to turn it over to him for just a moment so he can introduce himself, and then we'll just get right into Ligeia.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm Jeff Thompson. I live in Nashville. For 35 years, I taught English at Tennessee State University. I recently retired a little bit early. I have written 3 books about producer-director Dan Curtis, who created Dark Shadows, produced The Night Stalker, and directed Trilogy of Terror, Burnt Offerings, The Winds of War. Today is a very special day for Dark Shadows fans, June 27th. This is the 57th anniversary of Dark Shadows. The ABC Gothic serial began on Monday, June 27th, 1966. And ran 5 days a week in the daytime like other soap operas until early 1971. But Dark Shadows was not like any other soap opera. It started out as a mysterious show similar to the Gothic novels that were popular at the time, but nothing overtly supernatural. But as the show went on, ghosts and other supernatural creatures began to appear, and but the show was very low rated, and ABC told Dan Curtis, the producer director, that the show would be canceled. So he decided, well, what am I going to do for these last few weeks? The show's going to be canceled. So his 3 young daughters, who were about the age of us fans who were watching back then, said to him, make it scarier. And Dan Curtis was a fan of the Universal monster movies, and he said, well, what scares me the most? A vampire. So in April of 1967, he added the vampire Barnabas Collins, played by the Shakespearean actor Jonathan Frid, and the ratings went up and up and up and up and up until finally in 1968 and 69, Dark Shadows was one of the most watched, most popular shows on daytime television. And throughout the run, the show used quite a few elements of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories, like The Premature Burial and The Cask of Amontillado, and a stern, cruel schoolmaster, like we see in William Wilson briefly. And then Ligeia was an influence on a story that was done in the spring and summer of 1970 parallel time. So I can elaborate on that a little bit more as we go along.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jeff. That's amazing. And I have been watching Dark Shadows from... I missed that there was the season leading up to when Barnabas shows up. And so I've got to go back and rewatch that. But I'm at the very end of the 1795 parallel time, and highly recommend the show. And again, there's just these little nuggets of Poe that keep popping up here and there, and it's just amazing. And so, all right, well, let's go ahead and jump right into Ligeia. And I'm anxious to hear, Jeff, from you, just because I haven't seen it yet, those, the story arc ties with Ligeia in Dark Shadows. So what did everybody think of the story? Any thoughts to jump right off?
Well, can I jump in? Or
Yes, absolutely.
I was sort of struck with it's not the very first time I read it. I sort of read it years ago as sort of trying to get through all of Poe, but I don't think I ever really absorbed it. But so rereading it, kind of struck and interestingly, having Dr. Thompson here, that felt like there were a lot of parallels to sort of vampirism within the story, and not strictly vampirism, but living dead and the eternal life angle. So that struck me probably more so than it did before, and I think it's a little bit there in the movie as well. But
I agree. It definitely is a little bit in the movie with the vampirism. Also that element of witchcraft, and the Abbey. I thought Corman did an excellent job of having like the way the set was for the Abbey, and then the dark room at the end. I'm not going to give everything away because it is a little bit different from the story, but the witchcraft angle, even Poe has some words that I kind of pulled out with like the pentagon shaped bridal chamber, and things like that, and the phantasmagoric effects, and trying to remember what other things. But yeah, I totally agree. Anybody else have thoughts on that, like vampirism, witchcraft, those elements?
Yeah, it was the first time I had ever seen that movie. So I had watched The Tomb of Ligeia, and I went back and I read the story. And yeah, and at the end when she's dying, it kind of sounded like a spell she was having him repeat over and over again. I don't know if I pulled that because I watched the movie and it was kind of like that in the movie. But I think what's interesting, which I never realized before, is that Poe actually hints at rebirth since the beginning. When he was talking, like when he first looked into her eyes, he could he had this powerful sense, like he was like looking at a beautiful like ocean, or he goes into saying like a butterfly, a moth, a chrysalis, which is like the pupal state. So it's interesting, it was a reverse because the pupa comes before the butterfly or the moth. Yeah. So it's kind of like that reverse, like she's alive and she's going to transform into something else. I had never really pulled that through, and I was like, oh, that's a really interesting that I didn't realize, because it's kind of like, in the story she is reborn, but what is she reborn to? So
yes, that was cool. Yeah, I agree. And the other part too of that was hopefully my brain's not gonna be forgetful. Anyway, well, that thought is gone out of my brain. I'm sorry. Anybody else jump in? It will come back. But I know what it was. One thing that Corman did, and he did a fantastic job with this, where he brings in other Poe story elements with the mention of mesmer in the movie, and just I think, Holly, it ties into what you're saying with that mesmeric, hypnotic, trance state and things like that. That's where I was gonna hit upon.
And they play with that too with the black cat, at least in the movie. Of course, yes. The black cat is not in the story, but kind of plays that this woman is somehow transforming herself into this cat.
Yes, or familiar. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, so familiar. That's again with the witchcraft.
I can remember that. And then Will says, the vampire thing did not occur to me. I thought perhaps the transformation from Rowena into Ligeia symbolized the narrator thinking of her as perfect in death, while the relationship was in life was cold. Yes, that is a really good thought too. I agree.
Yes, the narrator had ambivalent feelings toward Ligeia, sort of an attraction repulsion, and you're right, Holly. He describes Ligeia in cosmic terms at the beginning, comparing her to nature and the stars and everything, and saying that he can't remember her last name, or maybe even never knew it, as if she has always been around. Yes, I found elements of witchcraft and vampirism, suggestions of it in this story, as well as in Morella, which he actually wrote before Ligeia, but I don't believe it was published until after Ligeia.
I believe that's, yes. I think that's right. I think that's right.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
But he, in a way, he adored her beauty, but seemed to be threatened by her intelligence. She was, an expert in mathematics and physical sciences and many, many languages, and he seemed to feel threatened by that. So he loved her and resented her at the same time.
Absolutely. And it was Ligeia was published 1838. So it was earlier on in his writing. And actually, Morella, it was 1835. I was thinking Morella was after that as well. Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting how you kind of, talk about that, how he loved her, but had a repulsion for her. And it was like Poe added a lot of Greek mythology in the story, which he does in many of them, but almost comparing her to a Greek goddess in a way, holding her up on a pedestal, but at the same time wanted that pedestal to be below him, the narrator, that is. One other thought that I had, a main theme throughout the whole story, and admittedly by the narrator, because again, it's an unnamed narrator. He's unreliable, especially because he's addicted to opium. And so you wonder, is some of this or all of this hallucinations that he's having about Ligeia and Rowena, and some of my, go to the dark side, when he thought he saw the 4 ruby red drops into the wine of Rowena. Did he do that because he was sick of her and wanted to get rid of her? I don't think that was Poe's intention, but of course my brain goes all different places whenever I'm reading things. Because I did some research of, just some of the analyses of Poe's Ligeia, and I don't think that was intentional, but I went to the dark side. Sorry.
I can't remember, and I just read this 2 days ago, so this is really bad. But
Yeah.
What was the field of study they were studying right before she died? It had to do something with rebirth also. What was the field? It wasn't mesmerism.
Metaphysical investigation. Yes,
Yeah,
I wrote that down so I would remember it. Yes.
So again, that ties into the witchcraft thing and everything. So it was something like kind of having that kind of vibe. But yeah, I kind of thought that it was like blood, it was like poison. I never thought that maybe he was actually poisoning her and making her sick.
Yeah, I just, I sometimes go to the dark side. I can't help it. And so, that little cynicism
Jeannie's rubbing
there.
off on you.
Yeah. Jeannie, where is the darkness?
I think you guys are covering it pretty well right now. I mean, I can throw in my own and make it really dark and gruesome if you want me to.
Go ahead. We're waiting. We we wait
What I'm
for
here
it.
for, Jeannie.
I know. Well, let me just say that once again, Edgar Allan Poe has done it with the fantastical side when it talks about mythology and religion. Because one of the first things that he introduces is asbestos. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't remember. But then he goes through all the different things. You've got the Egyptian ties of mythology. You've got the Greek ties. You've got the Druids in there for the witchcraft, which technically I don't like referring Druids to witchcraft. It's more just earth magic.
Yeah.
So then, and every time when I was going through it and her the way he describes her, the paleness, the tall, it's like a figment of his imagination that won't completely form.
And
It's
he
like,
also says she has a marble touch, which makes me
exactly.
think of a corpse.
Yes, and it's cold. And the other thing that pops into my head is if you've ever seen the movie League of Extraordinary Gentlemen,
Yes.
the wife of Van Helsing, can't remember her name right at the moment, she's on there, and just when I was reading it and that part, his description was so much threw me into that, of where she was transforming into that vampiric state, and it's really low brow to him, because he's like, she's this beauty that I love, but then all of a sudden I hate, because now she's turned into something that's totally horrible in his opinion. And another thing is he definitely was not a fan of feminism while he was writing this. Because how dare a Renaissance woman take stage with anything over him? But just that one little excerpt where she like is reaching out, she's like reaching out and trying to grasp onto something to hold her to this world, and there was nothing. It ended up, she got lost to everything, and he lost what his imagination thought she should be to what he now thinks that she was. So, the zombie forts, the vampirics, with the druids, transformation is a big thing. Reincarnation is a big thing. But once more, his religious elements are all there represented for everything. But Ligeia, yeah, all I could think of is Dorian Gray too, because there were hints of that to it, where, in the story of Dorian Gray, he never grows old, he never changes in the physical, because all that's taking place in the metaphysical of his own portrait.
Yeah, and that there's definitely elements of that in the movie The Tomb of Ligeia. Definitely.
Yes, so I mean, he hits all the markers, and the poem that's embedded into the story is one of true heartache and disbelief and darkness that he's like wanting to get across. So, and I mean, it was one that really, I was like, he's crying out, but at the same time, it's like this love-hate relationship of beauty, about taking something beautiful and turning it into something that's, I don't know, kind of out of this world. So
yeah, and the Conqueror Worm, the poem in there, it is very morbid, but it's so good. And he added that later. That was not in the original story, and he added that later. And I think that really took the story up a notch, having that in there. And then the Joseph Glanville quote, to me at the very beginning, and it's used quite a bit in the movie as well. It is such foreshadowing to know kind of what's going to happen before you even read it, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. But it's, even though it gives you a step up into knowing what's coming, you don't know how you're going to get there.
Right,
which is typical Poe and his way of, in prose. He draws a line and he just keeps dragging you, and then you're following it, and you're going, are we following a drunk snake or what? Because it's like, here we go here, then we go there, then we go. It's like, dude, come on. What, should I be happy? Should I be sad? Should I be, that's the one thing with Poe. It's like, if he wasn't a manic depressive, I don't know who was. Okay. Especially in his writing.
Yes. Will says there's a film with Nicolas Cage called Mandy, and the title character instantly came to mind when I read Poe's love story. Dark, mysterious, otherworldly, and into the metaphysical. Yes, absolutely. I have not seen that, but I bet that's a really good comparison. And Will, your background is fantastic with Ligeia behind you. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, my biology classmates were curious about my various backgrounds for our Poe meetings. I had a nice coastal area to represent the Kingdom by the Sea and Annabelle Lee.
Nice. So very cool.
This is my theme this month.
Awesome.
Great.
All right. So Dr. Jeff, tell us about the Dark Shadows connection with Ligeia.
Okay. When you and Jeannie contacted me and said, let's talk about Ligeia and how it connects to Dark Shadows, I had to think for a minute. Well, which storyline are they thinking about? But then I realized, okay, it's 1970 parallel time. Previously, Dark Shadows had gone back in time to 1795 to show us how Barnabas became a vampire, cursed by the witch Angelique, and to 1897 for an origin story of Quentin Collins, a werewolf who later becomes a Dorian Gray type character with a portrait. But for those of us who have read science fiction and horror and comic books and have watched Star Trek, Doctor Who, and Dark Shadows, we understand parallel time, and now I guess it's all over current movies with the multiverse. But Dark Shadows' idea of parallel time was a different band of time running concurrently with ours, in which the people there, played by the same Dark Shadows actors, live different lives because they have made different choices. That was the phrase that was used over and over. Barnabas Collins discovered a portal into parallel time in a room in the closed-off east wing of Collinwood, the house where the Collins family lived. And he couldn't enter. He could open the doors, but then there was an invisible barrier where he could not enter. But he would see interactions of people in that time. But then occasionally when he opened the door, it would be in our time, so to speak, because the room was deserted and dilapidated. And so by standing in the room and waiting for the room to change, that's how he was able to cross over into parallel time, because he had no counterpart in that time, because he found a book called The Life and Death of Barnabas Collins. And so he realized, well, in this time, my counterpart never became a vampire. And so he was crossing over in search of maybe a solution to his vampirism or a cure or something. And a great influence of the parallel time story is Rebecca, the novel by Daphne du Maurier and the great Alfred Hitchcock movie, Rebecca. Yes. It's all about the master of Collinwood comes back home and brings with him a new wife, but the cold, stern housekeeper is still devoted to the memory of his first wife. And there's a beautiful painting of Angelique Collins, and her room is kept exactly the way she had it when she was alive, and her lavish bedroom is the parallel time room, the portal where Barnabas enters. And reading Ligeia, I got to thinking, well, the story goes into great detail about that room and how special it was, and it was all to Ligeia's tastes. Even when Rowena was in the room, it still seemed to echo Ligeia and have her presence in there. And but then in the storyline, Angelique Collins, late wife of Quentin Collins, supposedly is dead and gone, but actress Laura Parker, who played several versions of Angelique during the course of Dark Shadows, suddenly appears at Collinwood, and everyone is shocked and horrified, thinking that she is Angelique, but it is explained that she is Angelique's twin sister, Alexis. But the housekeeper does not believe it. She thinks that it's really Angelique. Angelique and Quentin's young son, Daniel, thinks that she is his mother. And so we don't really know for sure. And the show, as a good soap opera would, draws out the mystery of, well, is she Alexis or is she really Angelique? But I'll have to tell a few things about the story in order to reveal how it ties into Ligeia, but
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
It won't ruin anything, even if you haven't seen it. But and around episodes 1000 and 1001, this happened. It finally was revealed to the viewers, at least, without a doubt, that she really was Alexis, her twin sister. But Alexis, and so she and Quentin open Angelique's coffin, which is in the wall of the mausoleum at on the grounds of Collinwood, and find that even though Angelique died 6 months earlier, her body is perfectly preserved. And they are shocked about that and think that there is some sort of witchcraft or something going on. And so Quentin decides that he will burn the body. But he leaves Alexis in the mausoleum with the open coffin, and suddenly the body in the coffin awakens, and she is the real, supposedly dead Angelique, now come back to life. And she, as the story goes on, we learn she is a succubus. She drains the life force from others in order for her to stay alive. And so that's what she does to her sister Alexis. She kills her and puts Alexis's body in the coffin, and her body is the one that is burned. And Angelique comes to Collinwood and takes the place of Alexis, but intends to get rid of Quentin's new wife and to reassert her complete dominance and rule at Collinwood. So the fact that the two women commingle and are almost interchangeable, and one takes the place of the other, one ends up dead, but the other comes back to life and now is alive, is very much like Ligeia.
Yes.
And when I have watched the show, I didn't really think about that as much. It always, I was thinking about the novel and the movie Rebecca. But you're right. It's the writers loved, getting inspiration from Poe and many other authors and stories and movies and legends. And so I'm sure that they had read Ligeia and had that in the backs of their minds as they put together this 1970 parallel time story, which was one of my favorite parts of Dark Shadows. I thought it was very unusual, original, unique, original in even though so much of Dark Shadows took elements from Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and so many others, and yet the way Dark Shadows recombined and put all of the elements together, it turned the familiar into something highly original, something that had never been seen on daytime TV or perhaps on TV at all up to that point. And in some ways, Dark Shadows is still unique, even though it has gone on to influence many subsequent TV shows and movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. To me, just like with Dark Shadows and some of the adaptations people have done from that, and what Dark Shadows did with some of the adaptations of the classics, especially the Gothic tales, even Poe's work is still being adapted in multiple forms in music, movies, TV, you name it. And it's like we can still adapt as long as we keep that element of, honoring, paying homage to the classics and those writers and everything. And I think that's just amazing that all of this is still living on. And, I was born the last year that Dark Shadows was on in 71, and my parents are both deceased, and I would love, if my mother was still alive, for multiple reasons, but to ask her, because she watched soap operas, if she watched Dark Shadows, and I have no idea if she did, but I kind of want to say she might not have, but my father, I could see him watching it because he was totally into horror, so...
Oh, yes.
So my mother did watch it. She would race home from school to watch it.
That's awesome.
And when I was little, because you and I are of the same age, like
Mhm.
it was in syndicate by the time I was little.
Yeah.
So like my mother and I talked about this the other day. And I said to her, she goes, you know, you said the funniest thing once. And I said, what's that? She said that I'm Mrs. Barnabas Collins. And I said that you were? And she goes, no, you were referring to yourself. I was like, oh gosh. It's like, I guess I come by this honestly. She goes, yeah,
Oh
you do.
gosh.
But I remember watching, I think it was in syndication until like 1980. Do you know?
Yes,
Am I correct in saying that?
Dark Shadows left ABC in 1971 and then went into syndication in the mid 70s, like 75 to 77,
Okay.
and then came back in syndication in a big way in 1982 on a New York station and others, and then throughout the 80s, ran on various local stations and a few low power TV stations and things like that, until the episode started coming out on VHS in 1989, and then in 1992, when the Sci-Fi Channel began, the Sci-Fi Channel ran Dark Shadows from the very beginning, from episode number 1, 57 years ago tonight, and those episodes had not been seen since then, because the VHS tapes began with the introduction of Barnabas, and when the whole show ran through on VHS, then MPI Home Video went back and did the pre-Barnabas episodes, as we call those first 10 months of the show.
Okay.
So yes, so throughout, somewhat in the late 70s, but then throughout the 80s, and it was, you know, it could be found on TV stations, and then starting in the 90s, you know, the Sci-Fi Channel, and then every year since the 80s, the Dark Shadows Festival fan conventions. Leela has been to many of those.
Oh, I know. I miss those a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, they were great.
I do too. But so we were, Leela and I and other fans were able to meet many of the Dark Shadow stars and even make good friends.
That's right.
Some of them.
That's awesome. That is really cool. Well, all right. Other thoughts on Ligeia? Other thoughts? Anything different that we haven't shared? Let's see. Micah says, for me, the story, another reminder not to get married. It's just too stressful.
Well, I like the contrast between Ligeia and Rowena, who Poe perhaps named after the heroine in Sir Walter Scott's novel Ivanhoe.
Yes, I saw a little bit about that, of possible links to where he kind of got some of those ideas. Yes.
He says that Ligeia comes from a place near the Rhine River, which suggests Germany.
Yes.
Whereas Rowena is from England, and apparently the story takes place in England because he buys the ruins of an abbey and things like that. But so right there, just as other authors did, like Bram Stoker with Dracula, coming from another country other than England, Poe is showing a contrast and tagging Ligeia as exotic or unusual or mystical, or at worst an other. She is otherized because she doesn't come from England, or isn't familiar the way English people would be to him.
Absolutely. And you know, he kind of does this again with this story of, you know, he did live in England when he was young, and I'm sure he remembered several elements of England and such. My husband and I were reading Man in the Crowd last night, and together, and just talking about it, but you know, which takes place in England as well. But he writes about places that he didn't necessarily either live or live for a long time, but captures the essence of what we know of these different places and things. And I just, that just to me is phenomenal that he did it so well.
Yes. Well, in the mid 18th century, 19th century, 1800s, when he was writing, there was a subgenre of writing called local color. Various authors specialized in that, but many authors liked the idea of putting local color, so to speak, into their writings, meaning describing places, the countryside, the characteristics, the customs, the townspeople. And so I think he perhaps was indulging in some of that type of writing in this story.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting concept, definitely.
And
Any other
what's even more
thoughts?
strange is that the times that he's writing about these far off European areas is technically most, I'd say about 25% of the American population around the mid 18th, early 19th century were still very much immigrants. We're still very much tied to those types of land in Europe. You've got the Germans, that was the Haitians, you've got the French, you've got the ones from English. So in a way, he was kind of hitting upon the homesickness type of thing, or the areas, because America was not that far removed from Europe.
True.
At the times that he's writing these. So, and that's what I think is so, well, actually, it's not really that unusual, because, I mean, we had a lot of writers like, the local flavor or color, whatever, that you have, you had James Fenimore Cooper. He was writing about the Mohicans, and all the areas, the local natives. So it was like Poe was bringing in something that he knew that, hey, let's talk about what went on in the old country versus what's going on in the new country. At least that's the way I always see it when I read Poe. So
That's true. And then that also ties with a little link with what you said with the old and the new with Dark Shadows. You have the old house.
Right.
Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
Yes, right. Collinwood is where the family lives, but the old house was the original house on the property before Collinwood was built, and that's where Barnabas grew up and lived. And so when he is released from the chained coffin, he comes back and refurbishes the old house because he feels comfortable there.
Yes, and I've, as y'all know, I said earlier that I've been watching it, and because I can do some other things while I'm watching it, and so my husband jokes with me. He's like, "You got to have your Barnabas every day," and but
it's called vitamin B.
Yes, hey, perfect. That's so perfect. When we went for his middle daughter's college graduation up in the Boston area in May, we also went into Rhode Island and did a little tour, and also before that, Martha's Vineyard and such. But we actually went by the house that they used for Collinwood. I forget. I was going to say, Jeff, you probably know. What's the name of the?
The exterior of Collinwood was Seaview Terrace in Newport, Rhode Island.
Yes, and so
I have been there many times.
Okay,
I've been inside that house. Yeah.
Oh, have you been inside?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Oh,
people come and stay there, and they have gatherings. Yeah,
okay.
Some of the stars have come too. Yeah,
right. Yes,
a couple of them. Yeah.
We did go by it, and there's lots of trees around the fence area, and so I had to sneak up under. It was really kind of funny because there was this one little area carved out where obviously people go to get a really good shot, and so my stepdaughter was helping me trying to get the shot too, and we went up under there, and like there was a bottle of water and a Coke, and it's like, are these people like camping out? It's like, it was just weird. And so, we had to reach up really high to get the picture. And so I got some pictures, and that was exciting because that house is absolutely gorgeous in person. So just to doing a fangirl moment.
Right.
Breaking the law. Shame on you.
Yes, I guess we technically were trespassing. We never did cross the threshold. So
I think a lot of people do that.
Lily, you're probably right.
Yes,
yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, Virginia, you said you had notes. Was there anything different that you guys discussed that we haven't talked about?
Well, not okay. So, because I'm just one half, I forgot I was in charge of the half of the notes for the movie.
Gotcha.
Levi was in charge of the notes for the story.
Gotcha.
So as I was like searching for my notes at the beginning. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not in here. Where are they? And then I found them.
Mm-hmm.
Actually with something else that I pulled out that I'm going to be nerdy and show you guys in a second. But yeah, so it's all the notes about the movie.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
it's just
okay.
notes about the movie itself. It was more things like we were discussing the dream sequence, the way they did it in the movie, how it has that uncanny valley feel to it, which reading some of Poe's stories, there's oftentimes kind of an uncanny valley feel, to things that he's writing. But the thing that I found fascinating about that particular scene is that they actually had everyone do their action very slowly, filmed it at regular speed instead of filming them at regular speed and then slowing it down, because it's oftentimes what they do. But Corman decided, no, I want you to do everything super slow. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. And so it's kind of got that that anxiety feel that you have when you have those dreams where everything is moving really slow and you can't quite get things out. Like you're trying to say something, but it's not quite coming out because everything is moving so slow. You've got something chasing you. And while it's moving slow, you're also moving slow. And it's a disturbing feeling when you wake up from that. And that is exactly what that dream sequence in the movie had.
That makes total sense.
The black cat. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I was like, please don't let the black cat die. For those of you that are new this evening, I have a black cat named Poe, and occasionally he will make an appearance. He does not like to be picked up or held, but I do it anyway sometimes. But he's nowhere to be seen right now. He's, I think, upstairs. But anyway, the other thing that I made a note about was that when Rowena was, right before she was about to die, and, the narrator was seeing like the shadow and the sounds with Rowena, it was like almost too much. And then the narrator was having that same affliction with the sounds. Poe, that is to me, it's almost like a trademark element that he puts in a lot of stories, like Fall of the House of Usher, Telltale Heart, that extreme sound and how it affects people. And I just thought that was a really neat element that he did add. And I forget which, I think it may have been on the Poe.org site. I can't remember, eapoe.org, where they were talking about that Ligeia is a really good comparison to Fall of the House of Usher, just a little bit of that surrealism and things like that. Mm. But any other thoughts?
The movie Tomb of Ligeia is very sumptuous and lavish with all of those outdoor scenes.
Oh, yes.
The ruins of the Abbey, which is still an historic site that people can visit, and even Stonehenge, and then the interior sets, of course, were beautiful too.
Yes.
And then I was struck by Elizabeth Shepard's wonderful portrayal of both women.
Yes.
And, the casual viewer might not even realize it because she looks and acts so different in both parts.
Mm-hmm.
But
she does her voice, especially.
Yeah.
I was wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was funny because my husband saw, we watched it together, and we saw her as Ligeia with the dark hair. And I said to my husband, she's hot. He's like, I was thinking the same thing. And we didn't realize to the end it was the same I was like, that's the same actress.
Oh,
and
wow.
he's like, is it? I'm like, no, it definitely is. So I thought that was funny.
that's
Because we
funny.
didn't like her as the blonde. We're all like rooting for the other girl, you know?
Yeah. That's so funny.
Oh my
Oh.
gosh.
And Elizabeth Shepard is still alive and
Yes.
often attends, sci-fi and horror conventions and meets
Oh,
her
very
fans.
neat.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh, that is really neat. Yeah, she did an amazing job in that movie. And that was the last of the Corman films. That was 1964, Mask of the Red Death. He did
Yes.
right before that in 64 as well.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of, I have not watched, the only one I have not watched yet is Premature Burial. And I'm going to read the story again and then watch the movie. That's the last one on the list. And I'm sure that will be a Poe Unplugged later on down the road. It's not going to be next month, but I think that will be a really cool thing. But I'm working on, I have a Google Keep where I have a list of Poe films, and I have a list, actually Poe, yeah, it's all Poe films, not TV shows, but also Vincent Price movies. And so as I watch them, I check them off. And I know it's so very nerdy, but that's me. And Jeannie, I'm surprised, is not making a snide comment in jest.
Hey, I just was waiting for the right moment.
I know.
I'm not there yet, but
Yeah,
we're close.
sometimes she has to watch these with me. So
Yes. Reluctantly. Not that I don't want to, but it's like, really? No. Because you see things. It's like when you're talking about the syndication of Dark Shadows in the early 90s when it was syndicated on Sci-Fi was when I first started watching it. And that's the only time I'd ever seen it. I'd heard of it, the early times because I was a big sci-fi nerd too.
oh yeah.
But it being a soap opera is what really threw me off because especially at my house, our soap operas was Guiding Light, As the World Turns, and Young and the Restless. That was it.
Yep.
You weren't allowed to watch anything else. And especially anything that was talking about the supernatural, because of course I come from a Southern Baptist, Bible thumping family. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They had, but that was things that, my grandfather wouldn't allow alcohol in the house, no playing cards, nothing. I'd only allow certain books, but every time you saw him, he was just reading the Bible. So it was very much the time period that I got to watch it was when I was in college. So I wasn't at home. So I got to see things and experience things that I didn't when I was at home. And I'd always loved the sci-fi horror books like Flowers in the Attic. I don't know if anyone's ever read Flowers in the Attic.
Yes.
It's very cool because I loved watching it. And of course, Stephen King, he was one of my faves, still is. Then, you got Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, Prometheus Man.
Oh yes.
Then Bram Stoker's Dracula. I was always a very big fan of all that kind of genre because I loved it for the writing points of view. It's like these people had the lockdown on the use of language. And that's one of the things that always gets me about Poe when I was reading parts of Ligeia and everything. It's just his way with prose. It just spins a whole new world that you can add your own emphasis to it in your own little imagination, but he like sucks you in and he's built this and it's like you're in it. You're in this dollhouse theme of a story because you can see it, you can feel it, you can taste it. It's like he hit all the senses and even the extrasensory with talking about the supernatural. And
it's mesmerism with words.
Yes, and that's and you don't see a lot of that anymore because a lot of people introducing when I was teaching history, introducing children to just read the Mayflower Compact. It's simply like 2.5 paragraphs long. That's it. That was all. But if you put it on a Lexile scale, the reading level for the Mayflower Compact is a freshman in college. And here I am trying to teach it to 8th grade classes. So it's like there's this whole language barrier. So that's the one thing I love about reading from these authors in the early 19th century and all this that have such control of their language, is because it is like a living, breathing thing that has been lost. And I think everyone, needs to try to read some of the classics just to get the knowledge of, hey, this is how writing will really touch you if the writer can use his words or her words so profoundly. And that's why I always love Edgar Allan Poe.
And I Jeannie, to add on to that, I think that you hit it on the spot. You've got to read it with purpose to really, I can sit down and read a Poe story, and if I'm just trying to breeze through it, I'm not going to get the nuances that he intended. And so when I actually sit down and read and take notes on a story, I get so much more out of it. And again, I go to the dark side sometimes, but it helps me really think about it more and more. So,
yeah. And that to me is the way a story is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's, that's the earmarks of the masterful, in my opinion, is even after you've read the story, you're still in the story and you're still thinking about the story and you're still writing the story.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the wonderful things is that, oh, wait a minute, what if this happened? He leaves it open and vague enough to where you're the one doing the rest of the writing, so you can do it however you want to.
Yeah, almost like keep it going in your brain like a sequel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why Edgar Allan Poe and the shows like Dark Shadows and the Corman movies and all of those, even though yes, some of them, my kids always called them cheesy, especially when I taught theater arts and I have to show some of them. I showed them the 1934, it was either 34 or 36 Frankenstein movie, and they were such enthralled about it that they're like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, because whoever, I don't remember who produced that one, sorry. Whoever produced it, it wasn't verbatim, but yet they kept the nuance of the what if. It didn't tell everything for the viewer. You had to watch it and then you had to interpret. And I guess that's one of the things is about the interpretation. Everybody has their own interpretation and their own imagination. And sometimes that's how you come to different conclusions and get something that somebody else may have missed. So
yeah, I agree. And I think Poe did that in almost every single story, not giving too much of the gore away. And Dark Shadows does that as well. It's like it leaves everything, a lot of things to your imagination. And, I can't remember which episode it was. I was going to say, Jeff, you probably know, but the word vampire is not said until right after Angelique turns him. And so that was just astounding to me that they went all of that time, all those episodes, and then it's like he's a vampire, and then that it's said, and it's not said, or at least up to where I'm at, it's not said again until then, later. So
right, yes, when Barnabas Collins entered the story in 1967, in the present time after he was released from the chained coffin, no one ever said the word vampire. I think ABC might have been reluctant to use the word, but they said he's not alive. He lives at night. He's a creature of the night. Or they used the phrase "the living dead."
Yes,
but finally in 1795, after the show had become much more popular, and it was completely supernatural by this point, Angelique asks Ben Stokes, Barnabas's manservant, do you know the word vampire? And he says, vampire? No, I don't. But she implies that is what Barnabas is now, because he is sleeping in a coffin and comes out at night and needs blood.
Yeah, it just, all of that is so neat and cool. All right. Well, I think we are to the end of Poe Unplugged Ligeia, and just want to thank Dr. Jeff Thompson for being with us tonight. You added a ton of stuff for us, a lot of learning about Dark Shadows and Ligeia and all those connections. And so just hold up. I finished this book this morning. There's another one of them. You can get them on Amazon. Jeff was wonderful and sent me and Jeannie this copy and signed it for us. And I learned so much about Dark Shadows, but also just all of, like, again, House of Dan Curtis. Dan Curtis was amazing. And I
He
just
did a lot.
Yes, more than you. I had no idea. And so it's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the book and highly recommend that one. And I'm sure the other two, I'm going to be getting those as well. I've got a book stack this high that I can't get through. But yes, we thank you so much for being with us, and we thank everybody else for being with us too. This has been a great discussion tonight. Jeannie, do you have some other thoughts before we dismiss?
No, I think I'm kosher.
Okay. Well, I was going to say next month for July, we are going to do Poe Unplugged. Not I think it's the 25th. Which is the last Tuesday. Let me just double check the calendar. Yes. Okay. The 25th, my husband bought tickets to see Steve Vai, and he is insisting I go with him, which Steve Vai is an amazing guitarist. So I'm not going to complain. So we're going to have to move it up a week to July 18th. So probably by tomorrow, we're going to be putting out what story we're going to read. We've got it narrowed down to either Some Words with a Mummy or Never Bet the Devil Your Head. Does anybody have a preference on either one of those? They're both excellent if you haven't read them.
I like Never Bet the Devil Your Head.
Okay.
I'm following Holly on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine with
I
me.
love that one. Sorry.
Okay. It's great. It's great.
Either one I'm cool with, but that's just one I particularly I like. I kind of had an idea to turn it into a kid's book, so I was like, yeah, I kind of like that one.
Oh, yeah, that would be cool. And one of the reasons why we've got it narrowed down into two, our Gothic guest for next month is a surf rock band that does horror themed surf rock music, and they're called the Creature Preachers. And so many of their songs, they have the Mummy's Minuet, Reanimation, and one of their latest goes with Never Bet the Devil Your Head. And it's hold on, I'll tell you what it is. Give me 2 seconds. It's real, their music's great. And so you go, because our Gothic guests, we feature all kinds of different people. A Night to Dismember is their newest song. I met them at a Tiki event January, and it's the band it's all guys. I met their wives before I met them, and because we were doing a craft session together, making I can't remember, we were making hair flowers, I think. I can't remember. Anyway, but and then this lady says, "Are you the one that does the Edgar Allan Poe podcast that our husbands met your husband?" And I said, "Yes, I can honestly say that's me." And so they're going to be our Gothic guests for July. And so I have not heard back from them yet which one they would rather do, but I'm kind of leaning towards Never Bet the Devil Your Head too, because it's so good. So anyway, but that will probably be up by tomorrow or Thursday at the latest if I haven't heard from them. But most likely we're going towards the devil. All right. Any thoughts? Any last minute thoughts from anybody? All right.
Thanks again. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Dr.
It
Thank
was
you so
awesome.
much.
You're welcome.
And we are going to be doing a episode with Dr. Jeff and putting that out. Probably we'll have it edited and probably put out by the weekend. And so we're going to talk more about Poe, more about Dark Shadows. And so hopefully you guys will look forward to that.
Yes, I am.
All right. Thank you guys. Y'all have a great night.
You too.
Bye.
Night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.